What's up, y'all? Welcome back. Today I have 4 book reviews for you. Let's get into it. So, the first one is 40 Acres by Dwayne Smith. I was so frustrated reading this book. I'm not saying it was bad, but I was so frustrated and I didn't like the ending. I didn't like a lot about this book. I'm not saying it was all bad, but I just want to be clear. The entire book, like throughout the book, I'm being like, okay, this is interesting. I'm frustrated. Okay, this is interesting. I'm frustrated. Oh, okay. This could be good. Nope, I'm frustrated. So, the concept of the book was unique. It was it was creative. Essentially it was like a reverse slavery type book. And it was creative, but I just feel like I didn't really connect with any of it. And I don't know. Like I felt like I couldn't root for any of the characters. I didn't like any of the characters. I felt like some of them were so exaggerated. It was almost like a caricature. And so it's hard to take parts of it serious. And I just felt like I don't know, like I kept reading it because I'm like it's so interesting. Like I want to like the concept of the book kind of drew me in, and that's what I was banking on. And there were interesting parts. There were parts where I'm like, oh, okay, that's cool, like how he put that there, how he did this. But overall, I just don't think that it was for me. I didn't. It wasn't bad. So I've talked to people about this book, and most of them like it. So if it sounds good to you, like a reverse slavery type thing, if it sounds good to you, I would say check it out because most people that I've personally talked to, they liked it. And I think I'm in a minority when I say I just feel like it wasn't doing it for me. Again, the characters were either some of them were either too shallow to where it wasn't believable or you couldn't connect with it, and some of them were like too exaggerated that they were almost like a caricature. And then the one where you thought was like realistic or made sense for like the role that the character, then it went left, and I was just like, okay, well, people like it. It's not necessarily for me. I'm glad I read it though because again, it was interesting at a lot of different parts, but it frustrated me more than it didn't. So there's that. So that's the first one. The second book is The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton. This book, I went into it. This made my top 15 reads of 2024. And I went into this book blind. I went into it not prepared to turn my brain on how I had to turn my brain on. Like it was so much more intellectual than I thought going into it. But it's a short read in length, but it's long if you think about like if I had to reread stuff multiple times. I had to make sense of what I was reading a lot of times. Like it talks about religion, it talks about philosophy. It's heavy on the philosophy, heavy on religion, heavy on theology in general, heavy on like nihilism and anarchy and versus not, like societal issues, rebellion, different things like that. And the author, G.K. Chesterton, is known as the Prince of Paradox. And I understand why. Like, this book is trippy in so many ways, but it was so good because it was so layered. Like, I felt like I was in a maze and I was trying to work my way through the maze. Like, I started here and I'm trying to get to the finish line, but I'm like going up, like, nope, that's the dead end. And I'm literally working through a maze. It was mental gymnastics, but it was worth it because, like, who don't want to do a maze real quick? It was a good book. I actually saw a review that said this was like Alice in Wonderland for adults. I'm not gonna go that far, but it was trippy. It was. It had a lot of really heavy themes that were put into this book, but it also was one of the most witty books that I read like for the entire year. It had so much like wit and humor, but not like, super silly humor, but just kind of like sarcastic humor, dry humor. It had a lot of like humor, underlying humor that's not so overt. It was real, covert. They had it like where they snuck it into the lines, you know what I mean? Some stuff that was like super ironic and just, it was trippy, man. It took you for a ride. But then by the end of it, when I first closed it, like I had part of the book figured out. That book had to sit with me for a couple weeks before I'm like, oh, okay. Like that's where that was going, I think. But I'm pretty sure, but I'm pretty sure. Okay. So yeah, it was one of those books where I had to be prepared. Yeah. But it was good. It was well written, very witty, had the right amount of humor and the right type of humor for the type of book that it was. It's a classic for a reason. It was a good book, definitely. That's why I made my top 15 of 2024. The next book, book number 3, is Cultish by Amanda Montell. Okay, so I read this book early in 2024. Um, it drew me in. It's just going over how like language, how there is a language to cults. Like it's very cultish language. How language can be used to draw in and manipulate people, and how there are common themes found amongst different cults and things like that. So it was cool for me to hear that, and I'm like, yeah, I want to read that. And it was good. Like the first 40% of the book, I was really like into it. Like it was talking about like, famous cults that we know about. It was talking about some religions like Scientology. It talked about Christianity in there, like how the church might use certain language. It talked about what else? It talked about MLMs, and it talked about fitness groups. Like she lumped all type of stuff in here. And again, I read stuff that don't align with my point of view and my worldview and my religious views all the time. But she wasn't bashing like Christianity and stuff like that. But it was very, I feel like it was, some of her evidence was kind of weak, but I still read it, and I found some of the stuff really interesting. But like I felt like she was grasping at straws sometimes. But it still was a super interesting book to really like think about linguistics in that way, to really like sit back and be like, yeah, like the art of persuasion, what is it? Most of it is your language, you know what I mean? So I thought that was interesting. I thought it was like eye opening. And she mentioned in the book how after you recognize like this cultish language, you're going to be able to see it everywhere and like point it out on Instagram with like, she even mentioned like the boss babe movement on Instagram and stuff like that. But you'll be able to recognize it and kind of point it out and see. And yeah, I think she's right, but it had a lot of interesting things in it. I feel like I'm glad I read it. I feel like there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know about when it came to like certain famous cults and stuff. But yeah, if you've read that, I'm interested to know what you think in the comments, so let me know. The last and fourth book of this review video is Good Company by Cynthia Sweeney. This was one of the books that I got in the Book Advent Challenge, and the synopsis sounded good. The synopsis, like, was just talking about how the main character and her husband own a production company, and their life is appended once she finds like her husband's wedding ring in a filing cabinet or something, and her life changes with her husband, her best friend, and kind of herself. So I'm like, yeah, that sounds good. Well, not immediately. 80 pages in, I was asking myself, like, does this book get better? Does it get any better? It, in fact, did not get any better. It stayed at the same level to me, which is, it was mid. Like, it wasn't bad, but it was like, it just dragged on so much. Like, it wasn't enough going on in this book. Everything was centered around this one thing, and not, it wasn't even big enough to be sent. Like, it was just so much of it led to this tiny little event, and then it kept drawing back to that. And I'm like, I want to know more about what happened outside of this event. Like, I want to know other stuff. I feel like, I don't know. It's just, I didn't get what I wanted from this book. And that's a shame because it's the first book in the book Advent challenge that I didn't like. It seemed shallow in a lot of places. And then, like, I just I feel like it was almost immature, like, in some ways. And maybe if you find your husband's ring that he swear he lost, maybe you would react immaturely. But I feel like there wasn't another side of that. Like, there wasn't this, like, they weren't kids, you know what I mean? She's a grown woman. They have a teenage, early adult child. And I still feel like the way it was approached was kind of just, it just wasn't nuanced enough for me. It didn't seem like it had any depth. It seemed very superficial, surface level. And then the ending was kind of lackluster. But what I can say is I like the theme of the book. Like, I like the idea of dealing with, like, challenges in your marriage. What's that look like when you have kids? How you change in a marriage, how you change as a mother over time, how your needs change, like how your relationships change, what that looks like in your career. Like, I appreciated the themes, and that's why I said it was mid and it wasn't bad, because it had so many good themes in it where I'm like, yeah, I can get behind that. Like, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it because, yeah, stuff changes over time. Yeah, let's talk about it. And so I like that. I just didn't like how it was carried out. Plot seemed good, the idea seemed good, but I didn't like how it was actually carried out, how it was written. So, how there wasn't any depth to it besides what the synopsis said. Like, okay, what else? I kept finding myself asking, like, what else? So, yeah, that's it. Those are the 4 book reviews for today. If you've read any of these, let me know. If you plan to read any of them, let me know. All right, y'all. See ya.